So good morning, everybody. I'm Alex Shalek from MIT, the Broad, and the Reagan Institute. I wanted to start off by thanking all of you for coming on behalf of Partha, Musa, and myself. We're incredibly appreciative of you taking the time and coming all this way to have this conversation with us and partnering with us in this endeavor. I hope to get to chat with each and every one of you during break. I have to start off with a disclaimer at the beginning, which is that we are actually going to videotape this and put it up on the HCA website. So hopefully you're all okay with that. If not, I can turn my back and you can flee from the room and I won't hold it against you. So today marks the official launch of the first meeting of the Human Cell Atlas with respect to equity. It's awesome to be having it on the shoulders of the Gates Grand Challenges here in Addis Ababa. And it'll be hosted by myself, Musa, who's right over here in Partha, and we'll talk a little bit more. So what I'm hoping to do in this beginning session is to actually just give you an introduction to what the Human Cell Atlas is before people dive in and actually describe what is sort of the science behind it and why we think it's so important. And to frame why we're having a conversation around equity and why we've invited all of you here. So what is the Human Cell Atlas as a place to start? Well, the real goal of the Human Cell Atlas is to create a periodic table of our cells. As you'll see in some of the conversations that we have today, there's been some transformative changes in our ability to measure cellular properties genome-wide, looking both at DNA, the epigenome, the transcriptome, the proteome, and a number of advances that have really enabled us to characterize cells at unprecedented resolution. And what this is doing is it's giving us the opportunity to create a new map of what the human cell body looks like. And so a number of people have been very interested in the idea of creating a reference map that we could use to help understand, diagnose, monitor, and treat health and disease. So why a Human Cell Atlas? I'm sure in this audience I don't have to say why this is so important, but the cells are the fundamental units of your body. We're interested in understanding how these relate to things like mechanisms of disease. We want to understand what are particular drug targets that might be important, understand things like how genetics in cells might interact to impact drug efficacy, resistance, and toxicity, to build better diagnostics so that we can understand, given these ultra-high resolution measurements, the best things to measure to tell us what we should use as an intervention, and to think about places where we could really transform our ability to do biology, for example, in the regenerative space. So the HCA consists of a number of different things, and I'm happy to talk about all of these during the breaks, but I don't want to belabor too many of them here today. There are a number of different systems that we work across. There are groups that focus on specific organs or tissues, so if there's something of interest, please let me know. I'd be happy to connect you. There's a goal to look across tissues, so not only to do them in small areas, but really to get an idea of an atlas that's representative of humanity, something that would span ethnicities, genders, ages, and a number of different things like socioeconomic status. There's a series of different methods. Some of these are experimental. We'll show you how some of those work. A number of them enable deep molecular profiling and characterization of cells in space. And then there's a series of computational tools that are really exciting that have been developed to deal with this huge data that's coming out of this. And then there's a series of organizational things that take place and surround things like funding, the coordination of specific areas, and meetings like the one that you're at today. So how long have we actually been doing this for? Well, the first meeting of the Human Cell Atlas to sort of kick everything off happened at the Wellcome Trust in 2016 in London. And a number of us were there, including Partha, Musa, myself, and people like Katrina, having conversations about whether or not it was the right time to start thinking about using some of these technologies we're going to learn about to sort of transform our basis of biology. Since then, there have been a number of different meetings that focus on different things, like a technology meeting that was held at Stanford, some things around analysis that have been held in various places, a common coordinates framework meeting. But you'll see up here that a lot of these things haven't really thought about how to engage and empower people around the world. And that's really what we're hoping to do today, is to start to talk about how we could make this really a global effort that serves the majority of humanity. So one thing I want to start off by saying is that the funny thing about the HCA is that really it's a grassroots movement. It's not like there's some centralized body of funding that supports things, but we have a number of people that we've worked with who have committed funding to a number of these initiatives. For example, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the NIH, the Wellcome, the Helmsley, and many others, including Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who've been generous enough to help us do this today in collaboration with the Broad, the Reagan, and the Wellcome. So what we're really starting to do now is we're starting to apply some tools to change what we understand about the various tissues of our body. In various places, we've started to profile a large number of individuals, get a large number of samples, and to characterize at unprecedented resolution the cells that exist within these. What this is doing is it's creating these incredibly high-resolution maps that look something like this. If you've never seen one of these crazy UMAP or Disney plots before, you're going to become intimately familiar with them by the end of the day. But what I'm showing you here are individual points being cells, and the different clusters being different groups of cells which correspond to types or molecular states. And you'll see how all of that sort of gives us an ability to really understand what's going on in a tissue from first principles. But as you look at these maps, you can say, well, wow, there's a lot of points. But there's definitely not 40 trillion points, the number of cells that we have in our body. And really, we think of these as sort of first steps. We think of them as draft atlases. And one of the major reasons for that is that in setting up the HCA, we've always thought about it as, that it was egalitarian and comprehensive in its basic organization. To make a human cell atlas that actually is useful for all of humanity, we need something that actually spans across gender, age, ethnicity, all the various things that are important for understanding the underlying structure of human biology. In order to do this, it's always been clear to us that this had to be something that was much bigger than a small number of labs in Boston or in Europe or in San Francisco, but really it was something that was going to have to span countries, engage people across different levels of education and different stages of training. And that as we were doing this, that there was a tremendous opportunity to engage with different communities to pass along some of the education. How are we doing so far in terms of making this really a global effort? Well, there are thousands of institutions and members that are now involved. But if you look at the map that you can see when you go to humancellatlas.org, the problem is that it's not really balanced in its representation. If you look at this map, for example, of Brazil and what's happening in Latin America, there's a really small number of people who are currently engaged. And our hope is to do much better than that, to really make this an effort that spans across all different corners of the globe. So what are we doing about this? Well, the first step that we had was to have an initial strategy meeting that happened in London at the Wellcome Trust on June 30th and July 1st. A couple of you in the room were there with us, and we appreciate you being there as well as being here. But we started to try and really talk about what we wanted to do with the context of equity and to start to create a plan that would help us think through the space. That was also to help set up what we're doing today, which was to have a more inclusive and comprehensive meeting that was going to take place on the heels of the grand challenges. Like right now, like the room that you're in, where we're going to try and consider more formally some of the fundamental compositional, organizational, and educational goals for the HCA and really think about what made the most sense here. So what we've planned out as a way of thinking through this today are 4 sessions that are going to be based on having 3 20-minute talks by people covering different topics, where we're going to first give you an introduction to the HCA, make you familiar with the methods, tell you why we think that this is such a transformative opportunity. We're then going to talk a little bit about how we could accelerate global health using some of the technologies and approaches that are here. We're then going to talk a little bit more about some of the barriers and things that we need to do to make this actually truly global, and then to think through how we might actually engage people around the world, because it's great to say that we want to do it, but we actually need to come up with an action plan. And at the end of each of these sessions, we're going to have a discussion that we're going to take copious notes on that will hopefully inform a lot of our steps moving forward. So what are we really hoping to walk away with from this? These are goals that were very similar to the ones that we had in the London meeting. But one of the reasons that I hold that these goals are still important ones and things that we need to focus on are because the London meeting was a small number of people. And when you think about something as inclusive and as important as equity, we really need a lot of voices in the room to get a good sense of what it is that we should be doing and to make the right first steps. And so what we're really hoping to do is to refine some of our strategic goals, to agree on some of the things that we should consider when thinking about equity, because equity can mean a lot of things and does to a lot of different people. So we have to decide where we're going to start, to figure out where we can begin and what are the best ways to do that, to think a little bit about, how we'll present these things to the organizing committee so that we can get the mandate that we need to move forward and start working on some of these things, and then to identify some of the local individuals and organizations that are going to help us to be successful. And one of the things that I'd love to talk to the people about in this room at the end is some of the future equity meetings around the HCA. We'd love to host them in locations outside of the traditional ones. So if you're interested in a number of people coming and having conversations, your local institute, we'd love to do that. So In London, we came up with sort of a draft definition for what we meant by equity. I call it a draft because by no means do we think that this is final, but as a straw man for us to think about, what we really wanted to think about was the idea of inclusive representation, participation, and benefit from the data. When we thought about representation, we really broke it down to the idea that we were looking for diverse sampling across sex, age, ethnicity, geography, and socioeconomic status, things that we thought would all influence some of the properties of the cells in our body. And I'm happy to tell you how each of those might impact things at a break if you're interested. In terms of participation, really, we want to have broad participation. We don't want this to be something where samples are being sent centrally to a processing lab in Boston or San Francisco. We really want to build scientific capacity and leadership in a number of countries, including low and middle income countries, and to basically help people push their own science forward. At the Grand Challenges, there was this really nice sentiment that Africa had to lead African science. And, I believe that's true for every country that we're in. We really want to understand what are local priorities and help think through how we could use these methods and approaches to help you do the science that's most important to you and that will be of greatest global benefit. And I think as we think about generating data, one of the things that you'll hear from people like Tim Tickle later today is that there's phenomenal opportunities in integrating different data sets together. But there are some barriers in doing this that have to do with differences in the ability to use that data, the benefit that comes from it. And so we want to think about how we can make sure that we're taking care of everybody that's involved and that they get the opportunity to take advantage of the information that they're generating. So this is a very short set of ideas, but really as we sort of started having conversations, there were a number of things that came up sort of related to equity, some phrases that people thought were important. We can argue about the meanings of some of these, but some of the concepts that were important were things like empowerment, open participation, engagement, transparency, reciprocity. And I'd love to think a little bit more about how we can refine and adjust some of these phrases so that they really capture the essence of what we're trying to do here. But one of the things that we left the London meeting with and our conversations with various people with was that one of the most important things to think about as we thought about equity was the idea of empowerment and engagement. That it wasn't good enough to say that we were just going to do equity, that really what we had to do is we had to go out and interact with the community and start to think about how we could support them and the science that they were hoping to do. So we've only taken some initial steps towards that because this is a relatively nascent meeting. We had our initial meeting in London. We tried to engage people and get a sense of what they were interested in. To put equity into action, we actually went down to Brazil and had a roadshow, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later today and about the outcomes of that and about how HCA may be permeating into Brazil in the not too distant future. And today is the latest incarnation in trying to start the conversation and move things forward. So we had a successful meeting in London. We had a successful meeting in Brazil. I'm hopeful that we're going to have an incredibly successful meeting here in Addis. And there have already been some tangible steps towards building equity. For example, the Wellcome Trust gave a grant to Jantine de Vries to develop a roadmap for equity with respect to governance, conduct, and implementation, the populations that will be included. She's here today, and I'm sure she'd love to talk to you about some of the challenges and opportunities that you see. And also, we've been talking a bunch to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative about how to pilot some cross-training programs to enable education and also to support international engagement. But the big question that we're going to constantly come back to in this meeting, as great as these things are, is how do we define success and what are the right steps to take towards it? We have an idea of where we want to be. We're not 100% sure of how to get there. And what we're hoping is that together we can figure out what are the best first steps to take us along the way. So there are things that we can do, like we could track who's engaged, who's generating data, how things are being used, but I'm not sure that those are the most important things. A couple of things that we could imagine equity might look like. Maybe we can do representative sampling given some of the limited resources that we have by working with people in various locations and helping to prioritize some on-site data generation, collection, and analysis in a way that actually really supports regional interests. There are going to be complexities associated with every region that we go to. In having conversations with people from around the world, we've realized that the problems in each individual place are a little different. We want to figure out how we can get the representation that we need that's sort of beyond just science to make sure that you are successful in each and every individual region. And then, an important thing for us to think about is how can we get global buy-in? In a lot of places, people get excited when they start to hear about the tools and techniques, but a number of people don't know about them or in places there aren't great ways to connect. So we'd love to talk about how we could build educational content and outreach that's actually going to enable the public more broadly to know about these things and to reach a larger group of scientists. Some things that we've thought are potential needs just for you to think about in the background, but that are not a complete list, are things like outreach, workshop, and training opportunities at roadshows, really things where we could go to places where, the human cell atlas doesn't permeate, where a lot of these technologies aren't standard, to start to think about how to broaden exposure and engage people. I think a lot of this comes not from us, it comes from the students. So one of the things that I think is incredibly important is to enable exchange between labs so that we can get bidirectional understanding, both training in the methods and an understanding of what local priorities are. And, it's clear that in some places we're going to need to get some seed funding to facilitate some pilots that are going to help to generate the data sets that will make people believe that this is the right thing to do in various places. And there are several existing programs that we can leverage. Katrina Gold, who was here, was kind enough to point out one from the Welcome, this open research fund that takes enrolling applications. And if there are any that you know of in your region that would be good things for us to include in our list, please let us know so that we can distribute them. In going through the ideas of equity, really one place, the places where we've really landed on as sort of places to begin, but these are soft landing spots, are to think about empowerment, education, training, and outreach, really places where we don't have a lot of access right now. If this is not the right place to start, please let us know. We're happy to adjust this list. But it seems like the first thing to do is to make people aware and make them able to do their own research in the ways that they want. How can you help with this process? Well, for some of us, it's about joining roadshows. For others, it's about hosting them. We're trying to create educational content that will be relevant to the type of science that you want to do in your individual regions. So we'd love to have conversations about what are the things that you need, what can we help do? We'd love to have people participate in trainings or host trainings so that we can support people in science. We'd love you to facilitate the participation of your trainees if you have people that want to learn these methods. I personally host hundreds of people a year, and I would be delighted to host people from your labs. If you are so inclined as to provide funding, we would obviously love that. In a lot of places, when you understand that there are opportunities to include people that would traditionally not be included in these sorts of things, that would be fantastic. And in every region, there are people that are thinking about these things. And we don't claim to have a monopoly on great ideas in the space. We are relative novices. And I know there are a number of people who are thinking about how to achieve equity, how to enable education and empowerment. And we would love to connect with any of those people that you're willing to connect us with. And so I'm not going to over chat because what I really want to talk about is the science and the challenges. I just want to take a second to thank you all for coming here and thank you for your partnership in this. I want to particularly thank everybody who contributed to this. This could not have happened without support from the Wellcome, the Broad Institute, the Reagan Institute, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all of your willingness to be part of this conversation. So thank you so much for coming. And with that, I'm going to let the first session get kicked off so that you can hear about why we care so much about the idea of building a human cell atlas. Thank you.